Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The curious situation that is the WBA's heavyweight belt situation, it has reared its ugly head again, with the realization that the next mandatory challenger for the Super Champion belt held by Anthony Joshua could very well be Manuel Charr or Fres Oquendo. The horror. If you missed it, Charr over the weekend claimed the WBA's regular title from Alexander Ustinov in a performance where he struggled to start with, looked a little ungainly in fact, but gradually took over through the mid-rounds and even knocked Ustinov down to score a somewhat comfortable points win in the end. It wasn't one of the prettiest performances ever, but he did enough to get by the faded 40-year-old Russian and register the best win of his career. It really was. The piece of silverware that Charr now holds is widely regarded by many as a secondary title, a pretender of sorts to the Super Champion belt, which is recognised by the other sanctioning bodies and fans alike as the true WBA strap. And the WBA, it only has itself to blame here for creating multiple titles, including establishing interim titles from time to time as well. And it did all of this because more belts means more sanctioning fees and thus more money for the WBA to line its own nest. And the WBA does actually have, and this sort of runs counter to what's been happening, a well-stated goal of rationalising the belts back to one. But the problem is any move that it has made in the past 2 years, it hasn't materialised into any action. Then you throw into the mix that Fres Oquendo took legal action against the WBA a couple of years back, and he is owed a title shot. And because Oquendo is owed a title shot, the WBA has confirmed Charr must negotiate a bout with the Puerto Rican and reach an agreement before December 22nd, or a purse bid will be called. With Luis Ortiz now out of the way on a year-long suspension, the winner will most likely be the next mandatory challenger for Anthony Joshua's Super Champion belt. And no offense to either guy, but that's a sad state of affairs. I mean, in my view, Oquendo and Charr both have done basically nothing to deserve, let alone a title shot, to deserve a high ranking in the WBA. Remember, these guys were 3rd and 4th respectively when the rankings were published a month ago. They've barely fought. Before Ustinov, Charr's last fight was more than a year ago, and Oquendo, he hasn't laced up the gloves. He hasn't been in the ring for 3.5 years. 3.5 years, it really beggars belief. So the thought that one of these two could end up being the next Mando, it really is mind-boggling. And we often talk about second-tier guys, say like Jarrell Miller, Lucas Brown, Dillian White, guys that are sort of there or thereabouts, but not quite elite, or sort of still coming on the way up. They haven't quite made the step. And there are others, those guys just naming a few, but Oquendo and Charr, they're not in that league. They are 3rd tier, at best. At best. And Oquendo at 37-8 for his record, he could actually be considered a journeyman of sorts. While it might be a situation the WBA just has to get through to get the Oquendo situation off the books and out of the way so it can eventually rationalise down to one belt, who wants to see Oquendo v Charr? Who wants to see that? Let alone one of those guys eventually having to go up against Anthony Joshua or whoever the champion may be at the time. I mean, if AJ still holds the belt, you can bet your bottom dollar it's not something him or Eddie Hearn would be looking forward to. You'd think they'd be trying to avoid it. And you could definitely argue that that's not a pay-per-view worthy event. And myself as a boxing fan, I don't think I really want to part with what is normally $35 in New Zealand for a Joshua card via pay-per-view. And, I mean, if they were to get some people over the line, I mean, let's face it, I probably would get it, but it would have to be a really stacked undercard. And let's be honest, the last AJ card, it kind of underwhelmed, and it did lack a bit of oomph. So, in Oquendo v Joshua or Charr v Joshua, if you can imagine that down the line, yikes. I mean, right now, we're talking about unification with Joshua, Joseph Parker, Joshua, versus Deontay Wilder. So, the winner is waiting for whoever Joshua beats, or if Parker or Wilder beat Joshua. And, that's kind of like getting a dessert that's gone off. That's really not something that's tempting. And it's unlikely that either would take any step-aside money as well. They would want their shot. It begs the question, how on earth did the WBA ever let itself get in this murky position? And why were guys like Charr and Ustinov, I mean, we can see the Oquendo situation, he took legal action, but Charr and Ustinov, why were they so prominent in the rankings in the first place? It's a head-scratcher. And that's the thing, there's no transparency in boxing. It really is a situation that shouldn't have happened. And the WBA really needs to look at itself here, because they're actually setting itself for a bit of a facepalm here down the line. All it does is ensure that fans will be like, gee, there is no credibility in this boxing game. It's not something I want to see. How about you? Drop a comment, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.